we'd
Yeah.
love to hear about you, kind of where you're from, what you do, what brought you into recruitment and TA, and then for those who are checking out your profile, they'll notice that you are a little bit more independent, that you're doing kind of fractional work. So I'd love to kind of give you the stage to maybe define what does fractional mean, and then what is fractional recruitment. So go for it.
Yeah. All right, terrific. Yeah, good old-fashioned origin story. I love that. I am, despite being based outside of the U.S. now, I am in fact U.S. born and bred. Grew up in Michigan. Had a long career in Colorado, which I still consider kind of my home state at this stage. Came to talent acquisition by way of the human resources path, right? So a little distinct and different from what we see oftentimes where folks come up through the agency recruiting world and build a really robust career and maybe stay in that stream, or maybe ultimately do something like what Andrew's done. And Daryl, I think you similarly made that jump from the agency world into internal TA. So unlike the two of you, I have not had the benefit of ever working in an agency environment. I came up through HR and always worked in small organizations where I was an HR department of one, maybe two. And so I had really broad responsibility for all of the different pillars that you find in that broader people operations space, always inclusive of talent acquisition. And so as my career got longer and longer, and I really came to understand what about that work lit me up and where I felt my time and talent were best put to use, I began to niche down. And stepped away from a lot of those other operational elements you find in human resources and began to focus just on talent strategy, inclusive of things like performance management, professional development, and talent acquisition. And so that was what the final few years of my career as an internal corporate recruiter were comprised of. And I loved that world. I stuck with it for a very long time because I felt really strongly, probably too strongly, that the only way that I could be effective as a talent acquisition professional was as an internal partner. And working in a capacity where I really felt connected to and invested in the mission, vision, and values of an organization I was recruiting for. So that's my path through and to talent acquisition. But a lot of things changed for me, just like a lot of other people and a lot of the world with the start of the pandemic, right? So spring of 2020, my career cratered at the start of the pandemic when everybody was sent home, right? We were all going to be safer at home, work for 2 weeks to flatten the curve, and then we were going to get back into the office, right? So the company I was with at that point was a real estate developer, commercial construction company that I adored. They immediately went into a hiring freeze, and I was placed on furlough. Thought, oh, I'll be back in no time. And unfortunately, that's actually not the way it shook out. And instead, that furlough turned into a layoff. And so this really gave me an opportunity to think about what I wanted for the future, individually and for my family. My husband's career was similarly impacted. We both were, our careers were impacted by the pandemic. This created an enormous opening for us to have some pretty big, lofty conversations about what we wanted life to look like. And, my last name being Riska, I've got a little tagline, right? No Riska, no reward. And I have a pretty high risk tolerance. Yeah. I have a pretty
No
high
risk,
risk
no reward.
tolerance. No risk and no reward, yeah. So I felt like this was a pretty serendipitous confluence of events that almost like once in a lifetime opportunity for us to be bold and do something that we might not otherwise feel empowered to do, just by virtue of, both of us being tethered to formal employment and kids in school and all that stuff. And so to make a very long story short, I decided to hang out my own shingle, right? Set up shop as Search and Rescue. That's the name of my company. And initially, I envisioned that my company was going to be focused on talent services for job seekers. And in fact, that
Mm.
is what I did for the first year that I operated as Search and Rescue. I did work directly with job seekers around their job search strategy, resume writing, and that sort of thing. And I didn't recruit during that period of time. I continued to really push back on that idea with this notion that I still was living with, that I could only recruit internally. And then, just sort of as a little bit of a favor, in the start of my second year, I took on a single search for a friend via LinkedIn who connected me to a friend of his. And that really opened my eyes and ultimately opened a whole new world where I realized I could continue to recruit in a way that felt really authentic to how I like to operate. Continue to do work for companies, for clients that I did, in fact, feel connected to, where I felt invested in their mission, their vision, their values. I didn't have to do it internally. I
Mm.
didn't have to work externally in this very transactional, um, not relational way that I think is often the case with agency based recruiting. And instead, I could make it my own. And so that's when Search and Rescue really began to evolve. And I took on more and more clients, such that I very quietly rolled back the services that I was offering to job seekers, which I think was right and good. That market's really saturated. And frankly, I think there's a lot of people out there who are better at that than I am, who enjoy it more than I do,
Mm.
because really what I love is the talent acquisition piece. So I am indeed a fractional talent acquisition
Mm.
partner. And that is nomenclature that certainly we've seen a lot more of in recent years. We see that with a few other disciplines, fractional CMO, fractional
Right.
CHRO.
Right.
And if I'm being honest, it is perhaps just new nomenclature for something that has been around for a while. It's consultative partnership, typically working with organizations on a reduced basis, part time, right? So a
Mhm.
fraction of my time and my talent, my capacity is dedicated to more than one client simultaneously. And so this tends to be a really ideal fit for
Right.
small companies or scaling companies who need either foundational support, where they've just never had a dedicated talent acquisition professional who really knows what they're doing at all,
Right.
out recruiting for them, or they do have one or more recruiters that they have working internally, and they're just in a period of intense busyness where they need additional support, right? I think both of those circumstances really lend themselves to this model. And I think what sets it apart and makes
Mhm.
it special is I feel like an internal recruiter still, because I take on long-term engagements with my partners.
Mhm.
And so when I speak to clients, unless and until I tell them that I'm not an internal recruiter, which I always do, they would never know. I think I'm much more conversant in the nitty gritty of business operations, internal relationships, business structure, that sort of thing, that you'll ever find in an agency based partner. It's
I
just,
love
I do
that.
this on, sort of an embedded slash
Yeah.
enmeshed basis.
Yeah.
I think it's a really
Like an
great fit
RPO.
for me
Kinda
and
has
for my
that
companies.
RPO vibe. Yeah. No, I
Yeah.
love that, Erin. Thanks for that,
Yeah.
kind of, background of you. It's really, really good for a lot of recruiters out there because there are thousands of laid off, TA professionals, recruiters.
Yeah.
And, I've been in the industry coming up to 3 years, so still very much a baby in the industry. And I didn't really have a good understanding of what fractional was and what it meant. So that was
Sure.
a really good distinction. So appreciate that.